Size matters when you're talking about battery size, but only. And your wheels spin. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of LJ's Garage. I am not in the garage, but I'm in my office of sorts, you could call this. And today we're going to talk about EVs, electrical vehicles, and everything from the very basics to ending off of, is it the right time for you to buy one? And yes, I consider myself to be very old school, dinosaur-y, and I love combustion engines. I do. At the end of the day, I live on this earth and I'm all about protecting it the best way that I know how. And if EVs are the future, then so be it. So today my goal is to take someone from very basic understanding of cars to a basic understanding of EVs. I'm not an engineer. I was an HVAC technician for a long time, and I also do know quite a bit about electricity and things like that. But from a average working man's perspective, I know how to, wire in things and whatnot, and I understand the basics of electricity. With all that being said, if you are one of those engineer types, I only had like a year and a half, 2 years worth of engineering, and then I decided I don't want to be an engineer in life. I am just not that kind of person. So if you are those types and you have better ways to explain things, be sure to drop them in the comments as nicely as you can. Don't destroy me, don't roast me. Around my desk, I've got a lot of props and tools and things to kind of help break this down. And like I said, this is going from somebody that doesn't know much about cars, and they never knew much about internal combustion engines to begin with, and now they have to learn electric cars. You'll hear people throw around the term ICE vehicles, which is internal combustion engine vehicles. So I'm just going to say that when I differentiate the two, ICE EVs. What's funny about that is we're actually going from something that's really complex to something that's more simple, even though it's future technology, which is crazy to think about. But electric cars aren't anything new. They're new in the masses, but they're really not anything new. And they're really not that scary, other than the fires and the high voltage. Okay, so they're a little scary, but not intensely scary. This is like being chased by Jason Voorhees type of thing. He's dangerous, as in like he's coming after you, but you've seen Jason. He doesn't move that fast, so he's not that dangerous. As I was walking around my house and I was trying to find things that I can use to demonstrate, I realized that there's so much AC motors, DC motors, things like that around the house that people use all the time that they may not realize is exactly what an electric car is. So when people joke and say you're driving around a spiritless, emotionless toy car, it's a joke, but it's also the truth. Because if you take this guy, for example, well, not this one. I don't like that one. If you take this one, this is my Lamborghini right here, and one day I'll have a real one, but it's got batteries, it's got a motor, and this is exactly what an electric car is, but it's missing a few things. But in the basic form and the easiest way, this really is what an electric car is. So we are driving around full-size versions of these, and so you can't really be offended if someone calls your Tesla a toy. And even if you have a Tesla Plaid, it is still a toy, kind of. Just an electric car. Yeah. Alright, so let's start with a traditional car. So if you had a traditional car, something like this is the, normal platform for a car. This one's also potentially could be electric, but you'll notice under here it's got all the, underpinnings of what a normal car would look like. So let's say you have this, right? In a normal car, you're going to have your engine, combustion engine, so you're going to have pistons, crankshaft, camshafts, all those different things. Then you're going to have a transmission that takes the power from the engine and sends it to the wheels. Then you have different options as far as front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. And then to add another dimension to that, you have dual-clutch automatic transmissions, you have single-clutch automatic transmission, you have sequential transmissions, and then on top of that you have torque converter driven automatics and all of that. So that's why these traditional cars, like I said, are more complex, because as I'll get into towards the end of the video, there's a lot of moving parts. So let's talk about the basics of what components make an electric car. And the first thing that you're going to notice is that you're going to have a battery. A battery is the biggest, most expensive part of what makes an electric car move. Even more impressive is that the batteries, they're just lithium-ion batteries if you're talking Tesla, and they're just little single cells, and a lot of them. So a lot of little batteries make battery packs, and then combining battery packs make a larger battery platform. And then you have a whole subframe that is covered in just batteries. So now that we got the easy part out of the way, let's talk about what's next. After that, you have the motor, and the motor itself, here's a little drill. This same motor that's in here is basically the same thing that drives the wheels on an electric car. So if you've ever driven any go-karts, golf carts, any of those electric ones, it's the same thing. So it's just a motor, just like in this guy right here, like this little guy, a little wacky inflatable. So yeah, that little fan guy, that's just a motor. And so you've got one of those that pushes the wheels. And electric cars, they, EVs, whatnot, electrical vehicles, they have a couple different configurations as well. So you can have one motor here that drives both wheels. You can have one motor per wheel. You can have one motor for each axle. So one up front, one in the back. You can have 4. So one of the good things with that is that it allows you to have all-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, all of those things on an electric car. But the downside with that is you have to understand what it means by dual motor. And it could be dual motor, one here, one there. It could be dual motor, one here, one here. It all depends on the manufacturer. And now with Tesla having so much competition, there's Rivian, BMW, Audi, everyone's got an electric car in the works or has one already on the ground. There's a lot. There's a lot. And then the last component that we're going to talk about is the inverter. So that's basically the brains of the whole powertrain for an electric vehicle. And the inverter is what tells the motor how fast to turn, when to slow down, when to move, how to move. That's really it. There are other parts that are shared between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles, but at the end of the day, there's only one other thing that I want to talk about, and it's the differential, which is basically the part that connects the motor to the drive shaft and actually spins the wheels. Something else that is often talked about when it comes to EVs is going to be battery size, and trust me, size matters when you're talking about battery size, but only in battery size. That's it. Other than that, size doesn't matter. Same with, as I was saying, battery size. So you're going to have something as small as 28.9, 29-ish kilowatt hours in something like a Mini Cooper electric vehicle, and then you're going to have up to like 200 in like the new Hummer EV. And the difference between those is the smallest one is 110 range, and then the other one is like 350, almost 400. So with all that being said, you're like, why is there such a huge difference? And so do I need a bigger SUV that has a bigger battery pack in order to get more range? The answer is kinda, sort of, yes, no. Something interesting that I want to point out is the Model S long range has about an 85 kilowatt hour battery and gets about the range as you see on the chart, and so battery size is only part of the equation. Keep in mind, these are some of the best performing EVs at this time, and even with a full tank on my Jeep Grand Cherokee, I get about 500 miles per tank, but that's a 24-gallon tank that costs over $100 to fill. Like I said, the battery size does matter, but what the problem is there's a lot of things that affect the charge, the range on most electric vehicles. And the manufacturer, since it's not quite perfectly regulated, the problem is that some manufacturers are giving you, if you took that battery in a perfect condition, the test lab essentially where they developed it, what range can you expect? And so sometimes they'll advertise that range, but they won't talk about real world. So what happens when it's not 70 degrees outside and not perfectly cool? What if it's 80 degrees? What if it's 90 degrees? What happens if you now have 2 people in the car versus 4 people in the car? What about the air conditioning? What about when it's super cold outside? So those things all affect range, and that's where range anxiety comes in. And you can't blame people for having it. I understand it completely. I get it. Man, if you've made it this far, I appreciate you, because we're about to nerd out right now. We're going to nerd out. Not full on nerd, but at least a little nerd. I'd say like 30%. We're not going to go full 100 here. So we're going to start off with the basics. What exactly is an electric motor, and what does that really mean for you? So It's all about magnets and chemistry and stuff. Or in this case, you got a battery pack down here. The batteries all have liquids and chemicals and all sorts of things in them. And so those create power and they're rechargeable. Some aren't, but in the case of electric cars, of course they are rechargeable. And you push a button, it sends that power and you just keep going. So now we're going to talk magnets. Because magnets are very important in this grand scheme of electric cars. And you'll see why in just a little bit. And I know the engineers are going to be like, motors are not simple. But compared to an engine, a transmission in an ICE car, they are really simple. So magnets. I did a terrible drawing here. But you've got a north pole, a south pole, a north pole, and a south pole. When you put two magnets together and you put the north sides together, what happens? They push, they fight, and they separate. Oh, and then if you put a south and north, they attract. And so basically, inside of a motor, you're going to have one part that stays still, and that's the stator. So it's curved like this. And I'm going to put up some little GIFs or GIFs around the screen so you guys can see versus my little artwork here. And so if you, let's say, had your north-south on one side, and then on this side you have your south-north, and this guy stayed still. It always was north-south on this side, but this guy, they alternated, and it was north here, south there, north here, south here, and it just kept flipping like this. What would happen to this guy? So if this guy was mounted to something and he was secure and locked in, and this guy just kept switching north-south, this guy would just keep spinning. Because let's say you have the north up top, this guy's south, this guy's north, opposites attract. It's going to pull this down here, and then what's going to happen is this switches to north all of a sudden, and now the two things oppose, and this goes down, this goes up, and they just go back and forth. And that's what an inverter does. It switches this thing from north to south, and this guy stays still, causing this to just continuously bounce back and forth. I know that probably seems confusing. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. So imagine this is your motor, and you're going to have this outside. You're going to just keep north and south right where they are, but then this guy spins freely. Imagine it does, which it does. So then this guy is going to continuously switch back and forth, and now north-south is all over the place. So when north and south moves, it's just going to keep doing this. And then whenever you reverse it, and the inverter sends the power the other way, it reverses. And just like that, you've learned it all. That's it. Super easy. Yeah. So let's get back to this guy. I like this drill because it pretty much does a good job of explaining what it is, in my mind. So let's say you have this drill, you have this car, and you want to spin these wheels. What you could do is you could attach this, and your wheels spin. So essentially, that's what the little motor does on an electric car. And that's the way that I picture an electric car in my head. It, of course, is not that simple, but when it comes to the basic components, a battery pack, which is going to sit on your platform like so, that's attached to a motor. Motor does nothing without its battery. Got your battery in, put this on the drivetrain, set it on the axles, give it power. And the cool thing with this is you'll notice that this goes circular, which is the same way you want your wheels to go. When you have an internal combustion engine, those pistons are going to go this way, they're going to go that way, but they're not going to go circular. Well, we won't talk about rotaries or anything like that, but they're not going to go that direction. And so you're going to have to take something that's going to take the piston moving up and down and make it so that it turns something that's going this direction. So this is what's happening when you have a normal internal combustion engine. And what that means is that you have to have something in the middle, a transmission, that converts this up and down motion to circular motion. And that's why things break whenever you don't have reliable parts, when you have continuous wear and tear. And that's why by cutting out that transmission, and now you have something like this that sits on the wheels and keeps those moving parts moving in the same direction, and everything is moving in a rotating pattern, it cuts down on how often things break. And that's just common sense in a sense. If you have all these batteries providing all this power, how do you cool those? So the cooling system is the next key thing when it comes to electric cars. And don't worry, they use coolant just like ICE cars. So it's the same cooling system, but a little bit more beefier, and in some cases a little bit more streamlined even, and more efficient than a traditional car would be, because they're just pumping coolant through, and it's the same cooling system they use to take care of the car. Some manufacturers go a little bit fancier and they have separate cooling systems, but overall it's just a radiator. Car drives, cools the batteries down, and that coolant just pumps through, picking up heat, comes back around, gets cooled down, goes back through, grabs more heat, comes around, and it just keeps on going. And it just keeps on going. And then the thing is, heat likes to go from the hottest place to the coolest place. So if outside is 70 degrees and those batteries get to 100 degrees, the 100 degrees is going to want to go to the 70, and it's just going to keep going out the door, and that cools the batteries down. As I said earlier, you're going to have the high voltage system, the low voltage system. The low voltage is going to be kind of what you're used to in your car today if you don't have an electric vehicle. You have a 12-volt battery, and it just takes care of all of the stuff that, the normal electronics that your car has. Doesn't require much voltage, right? And then you're going to have your high voltage system. It all just depends on the car, but realistically, that's the stuff that can hurt you pretty bad. And usually manufacturers won't let you go anywhere near that. It'll be completely pushed away, and you'll see those big, thick electric orange wires. And that's how you know high voltage, so be careful. Something else that I often hear is the word regenerative braking. It's tossed around a lot, and most people really don't know what that exactly means. So some people are like, oh, by braking, it brings power back to the battery packs, and you can charge the batteries. Yes, it sure can. And so what that is it's essentially engine braking just like you would in a normal car. So let's say you're on the highway. You don't often hit the brakes when you're highway driving. That's why cars that have highway miles are good versus city miles, because it's gas, brake, gas, brake. In the city, you're decelerating, which is just lifting your foot off of the gas pedal, right? So essentially in electric cars, if you've driven go-karts, those things, you lift your foot off the gas and the car starts to slow down. And so you get used to that feeling of lifting off, braking. And what's happening is your wheels are spinning super, super fast. And normally with traditional brakes, you got your calipers, they clamp down onto the rotors, and that slows your wheels down, and that comes to a stop. But with regenerative braking, what happens is you've got your motor spinning as fast as it can, which your wheels are spinning the same speed as the motor. What happens though is your motor, it's getting all the frequencies and the wavelengths and everything from the inverter, and it tells it basically how fast to spin, how fast to slow down. And so when you lift your foot off of that, you're changing the sine waves, and they're spreading out, they're getting taller, shorter, all of that from the pedal, which tells the inverter what to do. But let's say you lift your foot off, those waves aren't going to be like this anymore, they're going to be like this. And what that does is it causes this wheels to slow down automatically, because now they're rotating faster than the motor is telling it to rotate, which will then cause a braking effect. So now, what happens when the wheels are still spinning and the motor has completely disengaged? For example, let's say you have your foot completely off of it, you're going down a hill, you're basically reversed the whole thing that we talked about earlier. So now, the wheels are going to start spinning because of gravity. You're going down a hill, they're just spinning, 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 and your motor is off. So your wheels are spinning, the motor is off, and what that's going to do is it's actually going to still cause this part that's spinning freely to keep on going. And so it's going to start going and spinning, and that's actually going to send power back the opposite direction, and it's going to send it to the batteries, and it's going to charge the batteries. It gives it a little bit of a charge. It's not enough to just single-handedly recharge the car every time. It adds a little bit of mileage as you're doing your normal driving. So if you can avoid hitting the normal brakes, the regenerative braking will give you a little bit of boost in fuel economy. Something else that's more of a nerdy topic, but it's pretty cool. So this is more of a normal transmission, but let's say you have a motor. A motor only has one gear, and it's just this. You set your gear, and that's all you get. But what controls the speed is, again, the inverter, and the frequency changes. That's what tells us what to do. Instead of having actual gears, like you do on a regular automatic transmission. And so a car with a traditional automatic will have anything from 3 to 12 to, I don't even know what some of the higher ones have, but let's say about 10 average. 8 to 10 is about the average amount of gears that an automatic transmission has in the year 2022. So when you're looking at it, you're going to have all these moving parts that are susceptible to braking, whereas on an electric vehicle, you only have one gear. And that's why the inverter is so important, because it determines the speed, but it uses this gear and it just has one gear. So that one gear is very versatile. I would say only motorcycles come close to the RPM capability that electric motors can. Most cars redline at about 72,000 RPM. You'll see some like the Honda S2000 that'll hit closer to 8, but when it comes down to it, that's crazy in the car world. You know, then you've got diesels on the other hand that redline in like 4,000 RPM. That's really slow rotations. But when it comes to this thing spins so fast. And imagine this hitting anywhere from 0 to 18,000 RPM is what electric cars are capable of doing. Yeah, it's insane. Electric cars just they make it hard to justify an ICE car. Other than the feel, the soul, the driving capability, they're just not there yet. But that brings us to another point. When it comes to electric cars, because the batteries sit on this platform right here, it unlocks a few things. One, it lowers the center of gravity of the car, which improves handling. You don't have all this high components. You're not trying to balance the weight any crazy way. You have a motor here, batteries here. You can kind of stack the motors to get this to be a 50-50 weight distribution if you wanted. Perfect center of gravity every time. This also unlocks the capabilities of a frunk. So you'll hear people talk about a front trunk. And that's what they call it in the Tesla world, is a frunk. And you'll see some manufacturers now don't have frunks. And that's because they're putting the battery packs in that front trunk. So moving into some more complex things, I'm going to start to talk about some other topics in the electric car market, which is that some cars are born and bred to be electric from the start, Tesla, and others, like let's say the RAV4 being sent to a hybrid, then converted to an electric. That's where you have a car that started off its life as an ICE car and it becomes an electric, and sometimes that transition makes it so that they're limited by design on what they can and can't do with the frunk and, you know, improving handling, things like that. They're trying to take new technology and put it into an old body style. You'll see this a lot, you know, in companies too, like BMW. They have a lot of their newer electric cars that they're doing now are just redesigned versions of their ICE cars, and they're trying to use as much of the same components as they can and switch over to the new technology. And new, again, it's been around for a long time, but it's now mainstream and it's produced in the masses. And really that's everything to an electric car. I mean, that's what gets them going, that's what keeps them going, and now you can kind of see a little bit better of what it is. So hopefully it's not as scary. I'm not an engineer, again, I'm just a normal person trying to explain normal car things to people that may not necessarily know. The coolant system is very important. Cooling is top tier, you know, top notch, because if those batteries overheat, it's a bad day. Those battery packs are not cheap. Over time, you can only charge a battery so much and it just loses its capacity. The battery degradation is a bad thing, but it's just unfortunately a thing that comes with electric cars. As with any battery, over time those battery packs just can't hold the charge they used to. So since they're sealed, you can't change the chemicals inside of the battery, and once they're done, it's just time for a new battery pack. It's not cost effective, it's not good for the environment, and that is one of the downsides to electric cars. As with everything else that's involved with making them, it's not the most energy efficient, the most eco-friendly processes, but it's all a little bit at a time. So eventually we'll get there. Yes, semi-trucks with running on diesel still deliver Teslas. So as much as you're helping the environment, right now might not be the time. And I'm not making this video one way or the other. I love electric cars. I'm not biased. I'm not going to hold on to ICE cars forever. But with gas prices finally getting up to like European numbers and prices, I still feel like I'm a long way from that. Yes, $100 to fill up a 24-gallon Jeep is expensive, and it does hurt, it would have to get pretty high for me to want to take on a new electric car. It really would. And I'm thinking when I see prices in like the $8, $9, $10 a gallon, I may start to consider it. Yes, we're at the point where people are starting to put charging stations in their homes, and the electric bills are really not too bad. I've seen people say that they got an electric car, their bill went up 10 to 12, 20, $30 a month. Compared to gas prices, that's a savings. So I go back and forth. I tell people, just look at your lifestyle, look at what you do. It might be time. I'm not spending 70, 80,000 on a Tesla. It's just not me. There's so many used gas cars that I can enjoy and love, and if I really want to, I can keep the Jeep and buy a $12,000 Honda Civic and be just fine if I care that much about gas prices, because that would still cost less to fill up, and that gets better gas mileage. The Jeep, I think I probably get like 18 miles per gallon average, but you know, it is what it is. With all that being said though, I hope that you guys learned something, and if you have a better way to explain something, be sure to leave a comment, drop some advice, drop some tips. What are your thoughts? When are you going to upgrade to an electric car? Is there something that I missed that I didn't cover that you want me to talk about? And if there are any electric cars that you think that will change my mind and help me jump further and faster into the electric car market, let me know. What did you buy? And what was your reason? I love to hear it all. So let's talk about it. And thank you guys for checking out yet another video in LJ's Garage. If you're new to the channel, consider staying for a little bit longer, hitting that subscribe button. Otherwise, I will talk to the rest of you on the next one. Peace.